it really is something that changes the way people make decisions.
It's really moved from theory to proven value for our customers, and I think what excites us is
Hi everyone, I'm Rob Stummer, Director of Growth at SMC, and welcome to another episode of Embedding AI into Enterprise Platforms, an SMC podcast series where we showcase 30-minute deep dives with ERP vendors and how they're hardwiring AI and also what's coming next. So let's dive in. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a couple of senior executives from Infor, and that is Aidan Brecknell and Matt Addley, both based out of Sydney, but I believe Matt's somewhere in Southeast Asia today. So thanks a lot for joining us, guys. Just to start with, can you just please give us a brief introduction of yourselves, your roles within the business, and then we'll go from there.
Sure thing. Thanks, Rob. Great to be here. Aidan Brecknell, based in Sydney, as Rob mentioned, leading the Pacific region for commercial. Yeah, looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, and myself, Matthew Addley, also based in Sydney. I'm an industry strategist at Infor, so focused on our go-to-market and then how we enable customers to take advantage of our enterprise applications, cloud suite, and technology. So yeah, really exciting.
No, brilliant. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. We're really happy to have you here. Just to start with, guys, there's a lot of hype on AI, obviously, which is one of the reasons we're doing this podcast, and there's a bit of a race to embed AI into these enterprise platforms. But I guess as a starting point, if you could just tell me about, or tell the audience, I should say, what really excites you about AI? Is it just hype, and why is this potentially the moment to act? So, just give us a quick insight into that.
Yeah, sure, Rob. I'm happy to make a few comments on that. I think there is a lot of hype, and I think for customers, it's often difficult to decipher fact from fiction in a lot of cases. I think what excites me personally is it's the sheer rate of change, and I think also the maturity of the technology as well. It's no longer this kind of conceptual stuff of the future. It's every day, it's real, it's usable, and it's really moved from theory to proven value for our customers. And I think what excites us is we're seeing customers not just kind of nudge the needle anymore, they're fundamentally shifting and changing their business like we've never seen before. And I think, from an Infor perspective, rightly or wrongly, we've been known as, I suppose, an ERP company. In fact, we're a cloud application company who's really gone all in on focus industries. So for us, it's meant going from already providing very much a data foundation for our customers, removing silos, but now moving, forward from that, going beyond automation, looking at how do we help our customers drive predictive insights, fully leverage that context, moving into things like predictive maintenance. And I think the time to act, I spend most of my time speaking with customers across Australia and New Zealand. I think the messages, particularly from executives, are pretty consistent in terms of them wanting to know, how do I make decisions faster, but also how do I react to market conditions, for example, more quickly as well. So why now? I think I would argue that to remain productive, to remain competitive and relevant in the marketplace, there has to be that move into AI. And I think, my last comment there is, you don't necessarily need to be a leader, but I think our perspective is that at this point in time, you probably need to be a pretty fast follower.
Yeah, that's a great point. We all know that AI has been around for quite a while, more than it is just now, right? And you guys and the big ERP vendors have been playing around with AI and trying to embed it for many years already. So it's just the onset of this Chat GPT and Grok and all the others out there that have made it front and center for the public, and hence the boardrooms now are taking real notice about, how they can really make an impact. But thanks, Aidan. That's great. Matt, what about yourself?
Yeah, so building on what you both just said, actually, for me, it's the value it can bring to a user in a role now. It's really the culmination of our industry-specific approach where, we've focused on solving problems for the industries that we serve. So as a manufacturer, getting closer to your customer, production efficiency and so on. And as you say, although, the headlines now are about generative AI and what that can do, machine learning's been around and helping us for a number of years. But now the amount of problems we can solve and the way that we can get very specific and more intuitive for the user as well. So that's really exciting for me, is that it's not just a technology that's in a silo that's standalone. It really is something that changes the way people make decisions. And, and as I'm sure we'll discuss, is how we can bring confidence in that decision making, and how also just, for many years, you go back to 2016, our multi-tenant strategy, that's actually now paying dividends in terms of how we can provide security, trust and everything else into that environment. So, for me, what's exciting is all of those things, the problem solving, but of course is the ease of adoption now as well. So it's not just a technology, it's something that people can use on a daily basis.
Yeah, and that's great, Matt. We are going to touch on that as we get into this podcast. But, that whole ethics point around, what's real and what's not real, and how people are using it is front and centre absolutely at the moment for boardrooms. But we will touch on it. But thanks for that. I just wanted to quickly touch on a macro snapshot, because we all know there's headlines everywhere. But really the consensus is that analysts, and this is not just one analyst, this is multiple analysts, they're predicting by 2027 around over 60% of core ERP workflows are going to have AI embedded into it. So that's a big stat. Over 60% are going to have AI embedded into it, with obviously assisted decision-making support there. So from your front row seat at Infor, do you think you guys are ahead of the curve, behind the curve? Do you think, is 60% realistic for your customers to expect that AI will be embedded into the platform? Maybe some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great statistic, Rob, but it's certainly the path that we're on. Infor is committed to a bold and forward-thinking vision in this space. We see it as embedded, so absolutely part of the workflow, not stepping outside and doing things differently. Whether that's immersive, context-based tools and insights, or whether that's chatbots, there's always going to be a tool that suits the need, that suits the process. And 2027, it's not that far away, but equally with the proven use cases we're already deploying, we're well on the way to that. So yeah, I can see the sense in that.
Okay, excellent.
Oh, sorry, I was going to, just adding Matt's point, right? I think, for us, for Infor, it's really our obsession around everyday usability for the end user, right? How can it be impactful for them, but not just that, more accessible for the end user as well.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the times the end users aren't even going to know they're using AI, right? That's Absolutely. The beauty of this. But, ultimately what leadership teams and executives want to help understand is, are the teams becoming more productive? Is it beneficial? And clearly the stats are showing and indicating that businesses are becoming highly productive because of this artificial intelligence that's being embedded in that people are unaware of, right? So what I want to do, I know that you're reasonably technical, so I want to talk about embedded architecture a little bit and dig into the nuts and bolts. So, can you maybe describe for the audience here and prospective customers where AI lives today within the Infor platform, and, what modules are currently being infused with it, and some of the architectural principles. So can you share some of that, Matt?
Yeah, for sure. First and foremost, artificial intelligence lives within the cloud suite. So we run our Infor cloud suite, so going beyond ERP since 2016. We're running on AWS, so it won't come as a surprise that we're leveraging AWS services such as Bedrock in order to make that step. So we're leveraging, the $20 billion a year of R&D of AWS, and also the baked-in security that provides. So, that's a leg up for us in the first place for selecting, the recognized number one leader in cloud service provision. And then if we think about how it's architected, really it's about three layers. So foundationally, it's the data layer. So, the data fabric, bringing insights from both the transactional systems, the enterprise applications, whether that's just ERP or whether it includes manufacturing excellence, such as manufacturing operations management or similar, bringing all of that data together so that you've then got your own view of the world that you can, run this intelligence upon. So that's sort of the capability layer. And then on top of that is the engagement layer where, as we were talking earlier, it's about making it part of the user's workflow, making it visible to them at the point of decision and giving them enough information to make that decision themselves. And so that, that engagement layer might be a chatbot, it might be machine learning, insights in a dashboard or some sort of graphic. I don't think we're quite at the point yet where we're just providing a user with a red button or a green button, but, with agentic AI, and again, because of the evolutionary approach and the decisions we've made early early on. We're very much on that path as well. And again, we'll talk to that some more and what that means for the user. But at the same time, at the moment, what we're doing is we're exposing those stepping stones to the user so that they can link together different challenges and different outputs to then make their decision rather than, the culmination of that decision right now. But again, as trust builds, as confidence builds, we're growing in that area. And then as I said just a moment ago, the important thing for us is building trust, both in terms of the trust of the decision, but also trust in the security of data and so on. And again, because we've got a multi-tenant approach, so the AI, the machine learning runs within the tenant, then you're not sharing data outside, so there is no risk of leakage, and then there's no risk of hallucination either because it's working on your production data. Of course, we leverage foundation models and so on as part of that building block process, but ultimately it's keeping the decision within your industry specific tenant.
That makes a lot of sense, Matt. I guess what I'm keen to understand is there's AI apps being created as we speak, right? There's hundreds of them, thousands every day being built and developed and trying to be sold everywhere. People are trying to become millionaires overnight. But are you guys using any third-party AI apps and integrating them into the platform, or are you, as in leveraging those third-party AI apps rather than embedding them in on the outside? Is there any of that going on, or I'm keen for your perspective on that.
Yeah, we are, Rob, and I can make a few comments on that as well. And look, it's a balance too. I mean, in terms of building our own models, I'll touch on that first. As I mentioned before, we're very industry-specific, meaning we're developing very foundational models around the industries that we serve. And I suppose what that means more practically is we don't need to invest millions or billions into training large language models from scratch. Okay, so it's a benefit to us, it's a benefit to our customers as well. We're then leveraging those models around very industry specific challenges. If I take the food and beverage industry, for example, which is a really common industry we serve here in Australia and New Zealand, we're building specific models not just around dairy as a whole, but for milk, and looking at areas like processing yield optimization in particular, and that's the kind of level we're going to. From a third-party perspective, though, we're very fortunate in that we have a global strategic partnership with AWS. What this means is, or part of that should I say, is it includes the adoption of AWS services like Bedrock to actually drive this whole approach. So Bedrock, for those that don't know, it's a fully managed service essentially, which simplifies all of the process of building and scaling generative AI applications across foundation models. So again, we're fortunate to kind of be able to leverage that relationship and that technology as well.
And that makes a lot of sense, Aidan. That's terrific to hear, actually. Again, from an inference standpoint, I mean, you touched on this a little bit, Matt, but are you running it in tenant? Is it in the cloud, or is it a bit of a hybrid approach? What's the strategy and the position that Infor is taking on that?
Yeah, absolutely within the tenant, because then you solve a lot of the concerns, a lot of the issues. Doesn't mean that, again, I spoke earlier to the data fabric, doesn't mean you can bring additional supplementary context data into the cloud suite to include that in your calculus. But at the same time, it's important for us that we're keeping the industry focused, that we're keeping the security, keeping the guidance, de-risking sort of leakage or anything of that sort of nature. As Aidan said, we're leveraging the foundation models. We're not building from scratch. We're looking at third party and what they're doing, but then in each case the actual deployment is within the tenant, and the inference strategy is to use data within the tenant as well.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. I just want to switch to business value now. So obviously when businesses are buying your products, for example, they want to see business value, but when it comes to the AI part of your platform, are there any use cases you can potentially put on the table here that are delivering, or what you're seeing deliver really fast ROI for companies? And are there any sort of metrics that can prove that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share an example there, Rob. Look, there's obviously a growing list of use cases that's growing pretty quickly. Look, one that really comes to mind is generative AI in master data management in particular. And look, this may not be the most exciting use case for a lot of people, but it impacts the entire business, right? So, and it's also one that historically businesses have kind of put off because it's so daunting and is perceived to take a really, really long time to fix. Whereas AI is now making it a very approachable thing. So we've got a number of use cases in this area that we've seen around the globe where we've got a consistent model-based approach to actually item naming, translation delivered outcomes, and we're seeing customers actually deliver this in weeks or months as opposed to years, right, of what would have been manual effort. We've got a customer, GM Fowler. They're, for those that don't know, they build corrosion-resistant tanks, leader in the process industry. They took what they calculated was a 7-year challenge in master data of managing around 800,000 different items, it took them 6 months. That's some pretty impressive ROI. And then we look at their inventory holding, they actually reduced that by 5%. Of course, ROI means different things to different customers. Sometimes it's very prescriptive. For a lot of customers, it's actually looking at things like how do we enable increased market share and things like that. And Matt, you might have a perspective on this as well.
And that's the big end of town. And then you've got the little end of town where we've now got a button for project summarization. So, obviously within Cloud Suite Industrial Enterprise for industrial manufacturers, we've had project-centric manufacturing for a number of years. The execution of that is one thing, but every project manager knows that at the end of the month they have to provide a project summary, which they would then be cutting and pasting from ERP into a Word document, which risks inaccuracy and is a bit of grunt work. But at the same time, now we've got a button which will summarize that project for them. It will identify where potentially they're going off track and can actually provide some insights into how they can correct that. So the value of that is not just the effort saving, but it's also then the insights, and the context that can be provided along with it. So, whereas some of the challenges, as Aidan said, are solving the business from the bottom up, others are just a little bit more tactical, and quick sprints in terms of providing a new outcome for someone like a project manager or equivalently a contract manager.
Yeah, that's good. And there's going to be a lot of CFOs, no doubt, watching this podcast. And they are very keen when we talk to them. They want concrete figures, right? So they're saying, well, okay, I get that you're embedding AI, but I want to see percentage improvement around cost savings. Ultimately illustrates the value that the software is providing. Can you give any examples of that where you can see some tangible...
Yeah, another one there is customer CombiLift. They deployed what was a product recommender technology, but they applied it in the service arena instead of the sales side. And what that meant was, whereas before in the customer service space, because they've got something like 60,000 different variants of forklift truck, out in the wild, and you're a very successful Irish manufacturer. And before they relied on knowledge to actually build out that service job. But after, adopting this approach, this machine learning based approach to actually build out the service job, they had a 30% increase in first time fix. So from the CFO's perspective, there's obviously a service saving in terms of the number of times the service engineer drives out to see the customers, but also think about the customer satisfaction side. How frustrating is it for all of us when the engineer arrives and has a look and then says, I haven't got the parts on the van, and then goes away. Whereas there was so you've got not only the engineer saving, you've got material savings and predictability, and then obviously the customer service time too. So it really is, as you say, it's not just theoretical savings, it's actually being able to identify the categories of saving. At least, again, we have to bear in mind the maturity of the customer that we're talking to, because some of these things can be solved in more traditional ways, and sometimes they have been, but actually, is there an evolutionary step now that can be applied with the use of AI?
Yeah, and you're seeing any, I guess, hotspots out there where you're surprised that some of these customers are seeing some significant benefits?
Yeah, again, I think it comes back to and take the Fordler example. Number one was the fact that the project started with just trying to classify the size of the problem, but then they realized they could actually solve the problem. The hidden piece there was when you are a multi-company organization working in different locales, so with different languages and so on, is something like as simple as translation, but using generative tools to apply that piece and to do so really rapidly actually then helps you understand what it is you've got. And things like inventory holding and things like that, where maybe through acquisition or maybe just through master data divergence, companies don't realize what they're holding, and so therefore the value case just leaps up in terms of what can be seen as priority, just because it's there and just because it's so easily tackled these days.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And I guess from a roadmap perspective then, from Infor's perspective, I mean, with AI moving at such a rapid pace that we've never seen before in tech, are there any AI capabilities that you guys have locked into your roadmap for a specific reason? And is there a reason that, let's talk about two, for example, that you might want to put on the table, that why have they been selected as two priorities to lock into the roadmap over the next sort of, we usually look at 18-month roadmaps, but it's happening quicker now, so I'm keen on your perspective.
Yeah, Rob, I mean, as you can imagine, there's a lot of competing priorities, locally and around the world. But look, overall, and we've already commented on some of this, our focus remains crystal clear in terms of really deepening and expanding the power of embedded and generative AI. And ultimately, again, it comes back to the end users, making it smarter, more accessible for everyday end users. And that's I suppose, the key. If you look at embedded AI, that will continue to get a serious boost from our perspective, right? And again, what it means, and Matt's touched on this as well, is embedding intelligence directly into the key modules within the cloud suite, ensuring that end users can unlock that kind of real-time actionable insights, for their organizations as well. And ultimately what it means for us and our goal is that we want our customers to be able to actually predict and make strategic decisions to prevent the problem in the first place, or potentially predict the problem in the first place, rather than potentially a huge reaction to the problem once it's occurred. And look, just a couple of examples in terms of this direction for us. If we look at financials, we're looking at moving beyond some of the more sort of simple reporting into proactive anomaly detection, right? So how do we catch suspicious invoices or payment issues before they actually become a problem? If we look at distribution, which is an industry that we serve really, really heavily, we look at the warehouses. How do we use AI to optimize slotting, picking on the fly, looking at reducing travel time, boosting efficiency, and adapting to real-time order patterns? Manufacturing, again, an industry that we serve really heavily, looking at predictive maintenance with AI and actually pinpointing, failures before they actually occur. The last comment I'll make on this one is around, and I think this is the exciting piece for us, is now moving into conversational AI powered by Coleman. Right, so that's evolving from a very basic Q&A tool into what we're calling a true digital colleague. So it means not just answering questions, it's actually taking complex multi-step actions. So if we look at an example of, imagine Coleman saying, or telling Coleman, should I say, find all of the open orders for customer XYZ and prep a summary for my team meeting. Coleman won't just pull that data, it'll actually create the complex report and ready to go. And then if we look at that even further, using Coleman to be proactive, right? So sending timely alerts with all that data, directly to the warehouse manager. And I mentioned AWS Bedrock earlier, and we're really ramping up the generative AI capabilities of that platform as well. So ultimately, when it comes to the product direction of the roadmap, it comes back to Infor perspective that AI is a tool that should be a everyday partner that works with you, and that's ultimately a goal from that perspective. But I'm sure, Matt, you've got a perspective on this as well.
Yeah, no, you've tackled it well, and again, a lot of that in terms of that 60% 2027 goal that you mentioned earlier, Rob. So the embedding and making part of, but it's also leading us on that path of agentic AI and agentic ERP, where you are orchestrating more and more sort of 2 or 3 steps, or 5 or 6 steps into a sequence whereby, based on that user's role, instead of waiting for them to trigger the action, it's automatically detecting the anomaly and then prescribing a potential mitigation to a problem or post plan of action. So, we're moving in those steps. And again, because of the industry focused nature and because of the sort of modular evolution approach we've taken, we're well and truly on that journey too. Although how much of that is going to deliver in 18 months? And the question is more, how much are we willing to adopt within 18 months? I think, there's that building of trust and momentum first.
Yeah, just on that, I think that's important. I'm interested in this because obviously you're a global vendor and you're probably trialing different products and features within the platform. Who are the guinea pigs? Do the global guys say, let's try it on Oz first, for example? We'll see how the Oz customers go. What's the rollout for this AI?
Ask for volunteers. We incentivize our customers, that want to get on that journey to actually then be, as you say, the guinea pig. A lot of these use cases that are now productionized and part of our everyday came from working directly with customers and solving industry problems. Another great example being supplier performance, where especially through the supply chain, the days of significant supply chain disruption, more than just is this supplier performing well, but is this range of supply performing well, and are there people within that are performing better than others, and applying machine learning to that particular use case.
And just on that, with regards to the adoption of the products, are you seeing any industries in particular that are moving quicker than others, and what potentially is driving that momentum in those industries?
I think it's more actually a segmentation rather than an industry focus. And I think that comes down to the appetite and the approach. For the very large organizations, they do have a slightly more of a self-build approach. And so sort of our industry specific use case approach is slightly different to that. Whereas when you look at the lower enterprise, the upper mid-market that have already embraced our sort of roadmap and our thinking, then they're very quick to adopt and they're accelerating quickly down that that path. And then again, when you get into the S of SMB, then there's a lot of change management involved in this as well, and they haven't always got the appetite for that. So it's more, I would say, a horizontal sector than a vertical industry approach.
Yeah, I was keen on that because the adoption barriers are something that we're seeing as well. So there is a little bit of resistance in different segments that you're referring to there. But how are you guys actively tackling that particular problem if it arises?
If I continue on that, then it's to pilot it first. It's to make it really accessible, to support the change management piece. And as you said earlier, is to make sure that the CFO has got an understanding of potential ROI even before we start, so that it encourages them through the process. And then, of course, it's how we make it accessible, just in terms of positioning the insights that are provided and making sure that the user feels connected to them, rather than it being an independent decision presented as the golden truth, where the user's not sure where it's come from.
Yeah, no, that's great. I guess what I want to turn to now is what I alluded to at the start, because when we're walking around talking to the CEOs and the boards throughout Australia and New Zealand, ethics and trust is front and centre at the moment with AI. So it's absolutely critical. Do you guys put guardrails or frameworks in place to ensure that the boards have confidence that ethics and trust is part of the fabric of what Infor's putting out there?
100%. As we've spoken to earlier, your AI augmentation is running within your own tenant, so therefore it's only running on your data, which number one means, as we've said, no leakage. Number two, less risk of hallucination. When again, there's still that confidence and learning step just to make sure that it's not picking up even your own data. That we've all seen it, right? MRP's giving me the wrong result. Well, have you fixed your lead times? So is it a data-driven challenge rather than a model-driven challenge? On top of that, we are empowering our customers with the means to actually filter out the way that users are engaging with the system, so they can't act outside of their own definition of guardrails. So really it's just about providing a smart but secure and transparent approach to AI machine learning. We want to encourage our customers on this journey. We believe that, as you said earlier, it's adding value, it's adding demonstrable value to organizations that do adopt it. It's just making it easier, accessible and transparent.
Yeah, no, it's huge. And I guess privacy and security are always going to be front and centre for organisations, right?
100%. It's got to be baked in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm keen to understand how you guys provide traceability, for example. So, do you guys have audit logs, etc.? So can you perhaps elaborate on those aspects?
Yeah, Rob, we do. And to Matt's point, explainability and transparency is absolutely key, especially when it comes to driving that adoption and actually gaining the trust of the users. So from an Infor perspective, our aim is to really kind of open that black box. So the example I'll give is, the raw prediction is normally not enough, right? So users want to know, well, what's the actual logic behind it? So instead of saying, well, you should place the order with supplier B, we'll tell the user instead, we'll place the order with supplier B, but that's based on these last 6 months, which they can deliver within the time frame. They're 5% cheaper than XYZ, etc., etc. And so in doing that, we're finding that, that transparency really increases that trust, and again, kind of drives the adoption, which is key.
Do you alert users within the platform as to if AI is being used? So if they're punching out a report and it makes recommendations, is there some sort of alert mechanism to say this has been generated by an AI tool, so they can double check the hallucination part of it, which is getting better obviously every day, but it's still an issue in my mind that can you trust the data that's been spat out, and are they aware that AI has been used to produce it?
Well, it's evident to the user, because a lot of what we're providing is context based. So whilst at the moment you've still got the familiarity of your transaction based screens, you've then got your in context widgets alongside, which as Aidan just said, either you're communicating through text, so you know that it's AI driven, or it's a specific widget which is providing those insights. It's always clear as to where that outcome has come from, and again, we mentioned earlier taking users on that journey. So providing, it's in context. So if I click on something different, then the output will change because it's context aware, but at the same time I know that it's guiding me rather than actually making assumptions. The only difference to that would be something like a forecast, where it's a machine learning based forecast, where it's a machine learning based forecast, and if you've been using Bayesian forecasting, you've been using machine learning based forecasts for the last 20 years, so It's not exactly a new thing in that regard.
Exactly. I want to move on to some client success stories, guys. So I know our audience are very keen to hear about real life examples and the impact that implementing some of these AI capabilities has had. So if you could talk about the initial challenge, perhaps what AI capability was deployed, your implementation approach is probably important for our audience to hear, and then maybe one KPI that shifted because of it. So maybe a couple of customer stories.
Yeah, Rob, I'll dive a little bit deeper into the one I mentioned earlier, which is GMM Fowler, right? Because they just managed to really capture some important data points as part of this as well. And look, I'll start with the challenge, right? So again, it was a project that was kind of well overdue, almost put in the too hard basket historically. And so what we did is we really utilized power in terms of Infor Gen AI and AWS that I mentioned earlier. In terms of the overall scope of the project, again, over 800,000 items. And for them, it was about how do we improve the data quality and how do we create that kind of harmonization for the global use as well, again, being a global business. Some of the data points that, we've been super excited about. So for them, they estimated doing this project manually was a 7+ year activity. Okay, so the outcome for them was to do that in 6 months, which was significant. If we just look at the productivity, they actually measured a 95% increase in productivity. I mentioned the inventory cost before, and they actually managed to reduce their inventory cost by 5% as well. So for that customer, they were super excited about outcome. So were we, and obviously very proud that we were able to help and enable that customer for that outcome as well.
That there is a really powerful result, Aidan. I'm glad you shared that story. It's are there any lessons though from the rollout that you can share? Was there anything that in particular stood out as something you could take on board and have impact on the next customer?
Well, I think the first thing to point out with that, Rob, and I think what excited us is it's real life, right? So it's a real life problem that so many organisations kind of are challenged with, and we're able to introduce technology to solve that and have a massive impact. I wasn't personally involved with the project, but as always, we are always taking away ways that we can be even more efficient at delivering those sorts of outcomes. I think one thing that we've taken from that example and that we continue to roll out with our customers is starting with the end in mind, because I think one of the things we often do as technology leaders is we commence a project and we kind of sometimes almost forget about recording where do we land against the deliverables and the targets that we had in the first place. So certainly in Australia and New Zealand, when we're working with our customers here, we are really focused on what is the business case, what does good look like when we exit this project, and then in terms of execution, making sure that we really measure that, not just at the end of the project, but actually right throughout the project as well, because that's often the indicator that we're on the right track.
That's good. Anything to add there, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, let's take and another one relevant to our Australian, New Zealand customers is dairy. A food and beverage example. I mean, this customer is actually a Netherlands-based dairy, but obviously we've got it as the toolkit now, so ready to apply. And theirs was a yield optimization challenge, as many dairies have. It's a push supply chain. It varies. You've got the seasonality of the milk just from the grass that the cows are eating in a particular part in time. But then also on any given day, the fats, the proteins, and all that sort of thing can be slightly different. So we use machine learning to actually then provide them with a yield optimization, product optimization model. They've estimated for a 1% yield improvement, that's 500k euros that they're saving. So big money to focus on. But again, you spoke to learnings. The learning was that's the good bit, but then how do we monitor? So then it's also using that capability to monitor the actual yield as they actually go through the production process. So not to stop at that initial decision, but to make sure you follow it through to actually achieve the business benefit or understand why there was a challenge achieving the predicted benefit, so that then you can close the loop and make better decisions next time.
Yeah, so important, that full loop that you're going through, and you've outlined there. So thanks for sharing that. What I want to talk about now is obviously we've got a lot of buyers that are probably watching this podcast and evaluating which particular vendors may be of interest to them. So if, for companies actually evaluating ERP, let's talk ERP specifically now, and, they're keen to understand AI-enabled ERP specifically now, are there any due diligence questions that you think they should be asking? And again, the reason I ask that is because what we're keen to understand and articulate to the prospects out there is, how do you distinguish the substance from the hype? So I'm keen to get your thoughts on due diligence questions that they should be asking.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, this is a really challenging area for a lot of customers, and it becomes a challenge for us as a vendor as well, because there is a lot of, let's face it, fluff out there when it comes to AI. And I think for customers, and I commented at the start on this, they're trying to decipher what is fact and what is fiction. And ultimately, the questions should be guided towards understanding what's actually real, what's usable, what can I deploy today that's actually going to move my business forward, as opposed to just a concept. And one of the key questions that I think, I would guide, the audience to ask is to understand from the vendors, what is the AI embedded into the workflow, or is it maybe an entirely separate application? Okay. And the reason this becomes important is we're seeing a lot of vendors out there, I suppose, kind of bolting on AI as a separate standalone tool that requires users and data to kind of leave the core ERP system, right? So it slows down adoption, requires a lot of separate training, and becomes almost a shiny new object on the edge, as opposed to something that is in the core and able to solve the core business problem, right? So, Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So the follow-on question for me, and not surprising, would be, is it industry specific? Does it recognize the difference between a manufacturer and a distributor? Does it recognize the difference between a process manufacturer? So just the nuance around the decision that's being made, and the way that the model supports the user in that. And that's where, we're in the position where we can train our models on really deep and rich data around those industry specifics, not just at the industry level, but down at the micro vertical. So I'm an electronics manufacturer. What's the nuance there in terms of the use of manufacturer part numbers instead of just item number driven procurement? So really making sure we're focused on what matters to companies within our industries. And again, it's the evolution of our approach. So it's inbuilt for us. But again, as to build on what Aidan said, is it's not a bolt on, it's not a separate thing. It's really considered in terms of the value it's bringing as well.
Excellent, guys. That's great advice for our prospective customers out there. So I'm sure they're going to take that on board. That's been terrific, guys. But I just want to wrap up by, I guess, getting a crystal ball statement from each of you on how you think AI, where's it all heading? We're right in the thick of it now with AI. But let's talk, in 5 years' time, what's your crystal ball thoughts on where this is all heading, particularly, obviously from an enterprise software perspective in particular. So I'm keen to get a sentence out of each of you to wrap up as to what's your crystal ball statement for this.
It's pretty hard to do in a sentence, Rob, but
yeah,
I'll give it a crack. No, look, I think, I'll probably reframe that a little bit. It's where will the top global vendors kind of land, and what is their perspective on this, and again, for mine, it's about technology. In 5 years time, it should enable customers, everyday users, to easily predict, make informed strategic decisions rather than react to the problem or the change, right? And to Matt's point earlier around industry, I feel that industry developed technology is going to drive this. I think that's what we're going to see from a technology development perspective, over the next sort of 5 years. And I suppose going back to the point at the start, I think you don't necessarily have to be a leader, but I think you've got to be a fast follower.
Yeah, awesome, mate. And Matt, what about yourself?
Yeah, so, we spoke a little bit about agentic AI and how that's going to change things. So ultimately, it's going to be my user role that drives what information I'm surfaced in order to decide what are the priorities of the day. But I'm going to be less and less involved in the mundane and the routine. But at the same time, that brings even more focus in my mind onto the data integrity that you're capturing as part of that process. So I don't see a future where capturing data and having some structure somewhere is no longer important. It still needs to be industry focused and carrying through the problem solve. What you might see, though, is a future where if you've got AI negotiating with AI for a particular procurement exercise, then it's going to be data rich beats data poor. Rather than big versus small today, it's going to be data rich beats data poor. So, start now on that data, management exercise, because in 5 years' time, it's going to be even more important than you think.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, Matt. Thanks for that. Well, that's been great, guys. I guess what I want to do is share. I've had my AI note taker going as we've been speaking, so I've got 3 key takeaways from this discussion. And again, thank you, Aidan and Matt, for sharing today. I think our audience will no doubt find that very interesting and useful. So the 3 key takeaways from our discussion with Infor are, firstly, that Infor are really moving beyond automation to really focusing on augmentation and decision intelligence for organisations. Is that fair, guys? Yep.
Absolutely.
Secondly, Infor has ensured that when AI is built on industry, it is built on industry specificity, and it brings faster time to value and real world use cases. I guess you guys have proved that today for sure. And finally, Infor reinforces that it's actually okay not to be a leader, but you must be a fast follower. Your point, Aidan, in particular. And just on that, I guess one of my favourite sayings is, and it was one of my mentors that embedded this into my thinking many, many years ago, but he always used to say, create the dust, don't swallow it. And I use that, and I think a lot of people use that, but it's a classic one. This is certainly one of those moments where AI is creating a lot of dust, and some people are using it, some people are embracing it, others aren't, but let's be careful. Don't swallow the dust. I think you want to be creating some of this dust, but sensibly. Okay, so thank you very much, guys, again. I guess just from our audience perspective, you'll find a link to Infor's AI resources and implementation guides in our show notes, which will be attached to this. But just remember, for any independent guidance on ERP selection or AI readiness, visit the SMC website. We've got a lot of interesting tools there and good support. So what I'll do is I'll attach some of that as well in the link to our website, but also Infor's website as well. But thank you again, Aidan and Matt. That's been terrific. I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you at the next episode. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate having me on.
Thank you, Rob. Great stuff.